Have you ever walked into an argument only to sit alone afterward, regretting the words you failed to restrain? We've all been there. In moments of provocation, emotion rises like a storm, swift, fierce, and sweeping away clarity. Today's world celebrates emotional outbursts as a sign of authenticity. Yet there is a deeper, quieter strength, the power of non-reaction, not avoidance, not suppression, but the conscious choice to pause before we act. Stoic philosophy, a school once embraced by Roman emperors, teaches that while we cannot control our circumstances, we can absolutely govern how we respond to them. So what happens when we stop reacting on impulse? When, instead of lashing out, we take a breath? When, instead of striking back, we simply observe? That is the moment a truly strong person begins to emerge, not from anger, but from deliberate awareness. 1. Emotional reactions, the easiest trap to fall into. In daily life, emotions are inevitable. They arise suddenly, sometimes in a flash, and often push us into impulsive action. A cold glance, a careless remark, or even prolonged silence can throw our minds into disarray. In such moments, emotional reactions emerge as automatic reflexes. Rarely do we pause to ask, why did I respond that way? We grow up in a world where emotional reactions are seen as natural, even justified. When someone hurts us, anger is considered normal. When insulted, retaliation is expected. Yet, what we often overlook is that most of these reactions don't stem from the present. They echo the past, from unhealed memories, unresolved experiences. Take someone frequently criticized in childhood. They may become hypersensitive to any form of critique, no matter how mild. Their reactions, defensiveness, withdrawal, or outbursts, aren't due to the severity of the current situation, but to old wounds being reopened. These reactions not only damage relationships, but gradually erode our self-mastery. At this point, emotions cease to be signals for self-understanding and become unconscious drivers of behavior. Emotional outbursts are understandable. We are hardwired to survive. In ancient times, reacting swiftly to danger was a matter of life or death. But in today's world, where threats come not from wild beasts, but from words, glances, or social media posts, unchecked reactions have become a danger to our inner life and relationships. Stoicism does not ask us to eliminate emotion. It asks us to question before we act. A strong emotion is not inherently wrong, but letting it dictate behavior without reason's oversight is the trap. When we react instantly, we surrender control to circumstance, to others, to forces outside ourselves. Anger at a critique, anxiety from a glance, pain from silence, all are signs that emotion has overtaken reason. The danger of emotional reaction lies in its contagiousness. One person's anger spreads easily, setting off a chain of uncontrolled responses. A word spoken in rage can undo a year's worth of trust. One impulsive act can ripple through a career. Yet these outcomes could change if we paused for just a few seconds. Emotional reactions don't only harm others, they are a quiet form of self-destruction. After reacting, many fall into regret, self-blame, even shame. This undermines confidence, forming a toxic cycle. The more we lose control, the weaker we feel, and the more likely we are to lose control again. Stoics believe true freedom does not come from controlling others or circumstances, but from governing our own responses. Reaction is instinct. Deliberate response is trained. Amid rising emotion, The Stoic does not suppress, but creates space to observe and steer the feeling in a healthy direction. The trap of emotional reaction lies in its speed, its familiarity, and its disguise as justified. But once we learn to recognize the signs, when we are triggered, when we have a choice, we begin to escape the trap, and that's when inner freedom begins. 2. The pause, subtle yet powerful. Pausing, it sounds simple, yet it's one of the most important and difficult emotional skills to master. In the rapid pace of modern life, everything happens in an instant. Messages are sent and replied to within seconds. Social media, texts, emails, all pressure us to respond immediately. In such an environment, the ability to pause feels like a luxury. Yet between stimulus and response, there is always a space, however brief. And within that space lies our opportunity to choose. That is where true inner freedom resides. Not every situation demands a reaction, and not every reaction improves upon a moment of stillness. Pausing is not avoidance or repression. It is a conscious act. It is the creation of space between emotion and action. A deep inhale, a slow exhale, that alone can shift everything. In that breath, reason gets a chance to speak before emotion takes the reins. Some see pausing as weakness, that strength means striking back fast, never backing down. But Stoicism teaches that true strength lies in self-command, especially when emotions flare. Resisting the urge to retaliate, withholding a response to criticism, these are acts of inner mastery. Like any discipline, pausing requires training. It won't come naturally. When the body is conditioned to react instantly, breaking the circuit is no easy task. But like all skills, it can be cultivated bit by bit. Start with a moment of silence before responding. Ask simple questions. Is this reaction necessary? What outcome will it bring? Can I wait just a little longer? Pausing curbs impulsive actions. But more than that, it reveals the true nature of the moment. Some things seem urgent at first, but fade quickly. Emotions that feel intense often dissolve, if not fed by immediate reaction. There's also a deeper function to pausing. It reclaims control in conversation. When someone is angry, our response can inflame or diffuse. Silence, instead of a sharp reply, can prompt reflection. The pause, then, is not just restraint. It's a message. I am present. I am choosing. I am not ruled by feeling. Pausing is small, but its impact is profound. It doesn't demand brilliance or sainthood, only awareness. And that awareness is the seed of lasting emotional change. 3. The body speaks before the mind. In every emotional reaction, the body speaks first. Before words are spoken, before thoughts arise, before conscious awareness sets in, the body sends clear signals. Heart rate shifts, breath quickens, muscles tighten, hands chill or sweat. These are early signs of emotional turbulence. Often we ignore these signals. They go unnoticed. We don't realize that each time we're angry, we clench our jaw. When anxious, our breathing turns shallow. When sad, our shoulders droop, eyes dim. These physical patterns repeat in unconscious loops. Listening to the body isn't mystical. It's a practical path to understanding and managing emotion. If emotion is the result, the body is the earliest alarm. It doesn't lie, embellish, or justify. It simply reflects what's happening inside. By learning to notice these signals, we can intervene before emotion becomes uncontrollable behavior. Stoicism sees humans as an integrated whole. Reason and instinct, body and mind. The body is not beneath the mind, it is part of it. Emotions are not just thoughts. They're stored in cells, nervous reflexes, and physical memories we don't even notice. For example, when criticized, the body reacts before the mind processes the words. Fists clench, breath halts, shoulders tense. This is the sympathetic nervous system at work, primed to protect against threats. Though the threat isn't physical, the brain reads it as danger, triggering a fight or flight response. The danger lies in unconscious obedience. If we don't observe, the body drives action. We punch, shout, withdraw, without knowing why. To change this, we begin by noticing subtle signals. Before anger erupts, maybe there's a twitch in the gut. Before tears rise, maybe a warmth in the nose. No analysis, just awareness. This is rapid breath. This is a pounding heart. This is a tight neck. With continued awareness, the body becomes an ally, not a saboteur. It alerts us to emotion early, letting us pause before reacting. This is the moment of transformation, from unconscious reflex to deliberate response. Staying connected to the body also anchors us in the present. Emotional reactions often stem from minds lost in past or future, regret, worry, fear. But the body is always here now. When we attend to breath, posture, or heartbeat, we pull our minds back to reality. The body doesn't lie. It mirrors our inner world with raw honesty. By listening to it with clarity, we not only avert needless reactions, we begin a deeper union within, where mind and body move in harmony. 4. Observing emotions as an outsider. Emotions are often experienced as something deeply personal, deeply internal. When angry, one feels swept into an inner storm. When sad, one seems to sink into an unnamed darkness. In many cases, emotions are so overwhelming that we believe they are who we are. Yet, according to Stoic thinkers, we are not our emotions. Emotions arise within the mind, but they do not define our being. Observing emotions as an outsider is one of Stoicism's most essential practices. It is the ability to step back from the emotional current, not to be consumed by it, but to stand at a distance, to observe, to recognize, and to understand without judgment. This is not emotional avoidance, but a method for seeing emotions clearly without being ruled by them. In ordinary states, emotions appear and trigger responses almost automatically. An insult can instantly provoke rage. A rejection may awaken hurt. But if, in the moment the emotion arises, one can pause and ask, what is truly happening here? They move from being the experiencer of the emotion to the observer of it. Observation does not mean repression or denial. It is the process of acknowledging the emotion's presence while maintaining space from it. For example, instead of saying, "I am angry," one might say, "Anger is arising within me." This subtle shift in language carries significant psychological impact. It creates an invisible boundary between me and the emotion, allowing clarity to remain even as the emotion persists. The ability to observe emotions also helps uncover deeper roots. A strong emotion rarely stems from the present moment alone. Behind each feeling lies a story, perhaps an unhealed wound, an unmet expectation, or a fear of being forgotten or disrespected. From the observer's stance, it becomes easier to see how current emotions link to past experiences. This awareness is the foundation for breaking free from unconscious patterns that have long dictated behavior. Moreover, observation creates space for conscious response instead of reactive behavior. When no longer swept away by emotion, one can ask, is this reaction fitting for the situation? What might happen if I stay silent a moment longer? Or, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Such questions not only slow down emotional momentum, but activate the rational mind, leading to wiser choices. Training the skill of emotional observation requires patience and consistent practice. At first, it is difficult not to be pulled into the rising tide of emotion, but over time, the repetition of observation forms a habit. Gradually, the gap between stimulus and response widens. Within that space, we rediscover freedom, the power to choose how we wish to show up in life. Emotions are natural and necessary, but when we observe them with mindful eyes, we are no longer their victims. We become guides of our inner lives. This is one of the deepest advancements in Stoic practice, not to suppress emotions, but to understand, direct, and live in harmony with them. 5. The power of not needing to be understood. One of humanity's deepest needs is to be understood. From early childhood, we crave recognition, validation, and empathy. In relationships, not being understood often leads to hurt, disappointment, and conflict. Yet this very need, when unchecked, becomes a vulnerability that distorts behavior. Stoicism offers a radically different view. Inner strength comes not from being understood by others, but from understanding oneself. So long as we depend on others' recognition to define our worth, we remain easily swayed by emotional reactions. A misunderstanding, a misjudged action, a cold glance. These can trigger a sense of injustice and a drive to explain, prove, or defend ourselves. The irony is, the more we try to be understood, the more vulnerable we become. So, not everyone is willing to listen deeply, and not every situation allows for clarity. Some people lack the depth to comprehend what we're expressing. Some situations don't offer the time or space for explanation. Some relationships are simply destined to contain misunderstanding. When one releases the need to be rightly understood, they reclaim sovereignty over themselves. They no longer react harshly to misjudgment, nor lose composure in the face of confusion. Instead, they remain calm, knowing their worth does not rest in others' perceptions, but in their own internal steadiness. Not needing to be understood does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It is the mark of true self-possession, where one no longer seeks outside validation to feel whole inside. Free from the need to prove, they are unburdened by the pressure to always be right, rational, or pleasing. In reality, the desire to be understood often brings emotional cost. Misunderstandings provoke anger, pain, or even despair. People spiral into cycles of defending and clarifying, hoping the other will see the truth. But the truth is, not everyone has the goodwill to understand, and not every explanation delivers the outcome we hope for. Stoicism teaches that what matters is not what others think, but how we respond to their thoughts. When misunderstood, the Stoic does not rush to debate. They observe the rising emotion, recognize the craving for validation, and let it pass without impulsive action. They choose silence when speech serves no purpose. They act from reason, not from emotion. In this way, they protect their inner peace from being stolen by external ignorance. Furthermore, not needing to be understood is a form of spiritual liberation. Once we accept that no one can fully know us, we stop controlling our image in others' eyes. We live honestly, speak less, and act more. We are no longer troubled by distorted judgments or driven to offer unnecessary explanations. This strength, the strength of not needing to be understood, brings emotional freedom and signals true inner maturity. When one is no longer shaken by external gaze, they become steadier, more focused, and grounded on a path aligned with their chosen values. 6. Naming and accepting emotions. Emotions are inseparable from the human experience. They appear in many forms: anger, fear, anxiety, sadness, jealousy, guilt, and often arise faster than thought. One reason emotions wield such control is because we often fail to name them or refuse to face them when they surface. Unacknowledged emotions do not disappear. Instead, they grow silently and influence behavior unconsciously. Naming an emotion is the first step in recognizing and managing it. When a feeling arises, instead of reacting or suppressing, simply saying in the mind, "I feel angry," "This is anxiety," or "I feel hurt," can create a mental gap between the self and the emotion. That gap is essential for observation and mastery rather than emotional reactivity. Neuroscience shows that labeling emotions reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's center for intense emotion, and activates the prefrontal cortex, which governs rational thinking. In other words, naming emotions shifts us from reaction to awareness. It is the first step in transferring control from feeling to reason. In Stoic thought, accepting emotion does not mean being ruled by it. Rather, it is a sign of wisdom, for one can only govern what they are willing to face. Repressing emotion may give the illusion of control, but over time, it builds inner pressure, pushing emotions into the unconscious, where they resurface in more destructive forms. Accepting emotion means acknowledging that it has a reason to exist, even if that reason is unclear. No emotion arises without something within being triggered: an old memory, an untested belief, an unhealed wound. When we recognize emotion instead of judging it, it loses power over our behavior. Emotion, at its core, is a signal. The issue is not the emotion itself, but how we respond to it. Naming and accepting emotions also builds inner honesty. Often we display acceptable emotions rather than authentic ones. For example, instead of admitting jealousy, we show anger. Instead of acknowledging fear, we act cold. But inner honesty, the ability to name what we truly feel, is the foundation for healthy emotional transformation. Moreover, clearly naming emotions improves communication with others. Rather than lashing out or becoming defensive, we can express our feelings directly yet without harm. "I felt disappointed when that happened. I'm worried about this." Such expressions build connection instead of conflict, opening the way for understanding rather than division. Accepting emotions does not make us weak. On the contrary, it is the root of real inner strength. Only by facing the feelings we once avoided can we deeply understand ourselves and act from awareness rather than reflex. This is where modern psychology and Stoicism meet, where facing emotion becomes the first step toward a resilient inner life. 7. Changing the way we view the negative. People tend to see negative events as direct threats to safety, honor, or sense of control. Things like losing a job, being rejected, criticized, or failing an important plan often feel like disasters, Yet, Stoic philosophy teaches that it is not the event itself that causes suffering, but our interpretation of it. A core Stoic tenet, repeated often, states, "We are not disturbed by events themselves, but by our opinions about them." This means the same event can trigger entirely different emotions, depending on how a person receives and assigns meaning to it. One may see failure as proof of worthlessness. Another sees it as an opportunity to learn, adapt, and grow. Changing the way we view the negative, also known as cognitive reframing, is the practice of consciously questioning the automatic thoughts that arise during discomfort. For instance, when criticized, many respond with anger or hurt. But if one pauses and asks, "Is there truth in this criticism?" or "What can I learn from this feedback?" the negative emotion can give way to calm or curiosity. Reframing isn't about self-deception or sugar-coating problems. It's the act of clearly identifying your current mindset, evaluating whether it's accurate or helpful, and choosing a more objective, composed, and realistic outlook. This requires mindfulness, as negative thinking tends to be rapid, forceful, and habitual. Reframing also helps separate events from self-worth. One failure doesn't mean one is worthless. The end of a relationship doesn't mean one is unworthy of love. When we learn to distinguish between what happens and the meaning we assign to it, we reclaim authority over our inner world. Patience is key in this process. Shifting perspective doesn't happen overnight. It's the repeated practice of questioning, adjusting, and nurturing a mindset that is not blindly optimistic, but grounded and resilient. This capacity does not arise from blind faith that everything is good, but from a grounded trust that everything can be seen in a way that helps us grow. One common Stoic exercise is negative visualization, premeditatio malorum. This means imagining potential misfortunes, not to worry about them, but to prepare for them. When we've already envisioned the worst, if it happens, we are not surprised or overwhelmed. We meet it with steadiness, having shifted from passive to prepared. Most importantly, reframing builds inner flexibility, where setbacks don't break us, but bend us toward growth. That flexibility is not weakness, but the mark of a strength forged by time and trained through the mindful command of thought and emotion. 8. Mindfulness in everyday action. Mindfulness is often associated with meditation or retreats in quiet places. But in Stoicism and many other philosophical traditions, mindfulness is not just meditation, but full presence in every act and moment of daily life. It's not about retreating from life, but engaging with it fully, right where you are. Mindfulness is the ability to clearly perceive what is happening, both outside and inside, without being swept away by unconscious thought. When we eat while scrolling our phones, walk with our minds already in the next meeting, or talk while thinking of something else, we live fragmented. This fragmentation weakens action and unsettles emotion due to a lack of real connection to the present. Practicing mindfulness in daily acts, washing dishes, drinking water, walking, even breathing, greatly enhances emotional regulation and inner stability. When the mind is fully present, we can detect emotional signals, an edge of irritation, a wave of anxiety, before they escalate. And once noticed, we can choose our response rather than acting on impulse. Stoicism values practicality over ritual. In that spirit, Mindfulness doesn't require special environments or long durations. It is deliberate attention to what we are doing, with a non-judging awareness. When washing your hands, rather than planning your next task, simply feel the water, the temperature, the motion. Simple, yet complete. That is a mindful moment. Another benefit of mindful living is escaping the cycle of automatic emotional reactivity. When the mind is absent, emotion takes over. A careless word can spark fury. A small event can be blown out of proportion. But if we are present, we create space to see events objectively before emotion seizes control. Mindfulness is also a way to reconnect with body and emotion, two realms often ignored in modern life. When walking and feeling each step, when eating and truly tasting, when listening and fully hearing, we return to the now, to the real, instead of drifting through memory or fear. Sustaining mindfulness doesn't require abandoning a busy life. On the contrary, amidst the rush of work, family, and society, mindfulness becomes essential for clarity. A few conscious breaths during the day, a moment of emotional observation at a red light or a screen-free meal. These small acts, done daily, can bring lasting change in emotional control and inner peace. Mindfulness in everyday life is the foundation of awakened living. When every step, every look, every word is done with attention, we are no longer victims of circumstance or mood. We become creators of our own mental state. This is a quiet practice, unassuming yet profound. Truth to the Stoic spirit of acting without spectacle. 9. Writing to reflect on the self. Writing is a simple act, but it holds deep power for inner reflection. In Stoic philosophy, journaling is an essential tool for self-observation, correction, and discipline. Marcus Aurelius, the famed emperor and Stoic philosopher, left behind meditations not intended for publication, but as private notes for daily self-dialogue. It was through the discipline of writing thoughts, emotions, mistakes, and lessons that he sustained clarity amid the chaos of power and war. Writing is a form of reflection. When thoughts and feelings remain in the mind, they are often chaotic and emotionally charged. But when turned into words on a page, they become visible, shaped, and easier to observe objectively. It's like shining light into a dark corner, where forms emerge and fear loses its grip. One great benefit of emotional journaling is identifying repeated thought and behavior patterns. When someone writes often about situations that trigger anger, anxiety, or disappointment, they may realize certain familiar cues always set off intense reactions. Left unexamined, these patterns can persist unconsciously for years. But once written and reviewed, they become data, ready to be studied, understood, and transformed. Writing doesn't require eloquence or structure. This is not for others to read. It is an honest conversation with the self. The words can be clumsy, the emotions unclear. Yet, it is in that raw, unfiltered space that we reach hidden layers of self often avoided. Each sentence is a small step on the path to self-discovery. Beyond emotional insight, writing helps clarify values and direct action. When faced with a tough decision or emotional turmoil, writing out options, fears, hopes, and consequences can guide decisions based on reason, not emotion. In Stoicism, acting from reason, not emotional impulse, is a core discipline for inner mastery. A consistent writing habit, especially at day's end, reinforces awareness of how we live. Reviewing what happened, what we felt, how we acted without judgment, creates a loop of learning. Over time, this repetition builds a life of intentionality, insight, and continual growth. Writing also serves as a safe release for emotion. Instead of lashing out at others or bottling things up, putting emotions on paper diffuses their intensity without harm. It becomes a form of cleansing, acknowledging, processing, and softening emotion through reason. Writing is not merely a tool. It is a practice of therapy and emotional intelligence. In a fast, noisy world, a few minutes of writing each day, even just a few lines, can profoundly impact our clarity, calm, and capacity for inner navigation. It is a quiet act that can spark a revolution in how we understand and live with ourselves. 10. Compassion is not weakness. In many cultures, compassion is often misunderstood as a sign of softness, vulnerability, or lack of self-control. People mistakenly believe that strength requires detachment, coldness, and emotional distance from others. Yet from the Stoic perspective, compassion does not contradict inner strength. It is the mark of a mind that has reached true maturity. Compassion, at its simplest, is the ability to recognize another's pain and the wish to ease it. Unlike pity, compassion does not place others beneath us, nor does it arise from superiority. It is a shared recognition between humans that everyone is fighting their own inner battles, even if none of it is shown outwardly. In Stoic thought, the human being is not just an isolated individual, but a part of the greater whole of humanity. Epictetus emphasized, "You are a part of society, just as a hand is part of the body." Therefore, self-understanding must be accompanied by empathy for others. When a person learns emotional mastery, they do so not just to become resilient, but to remain calm, rather than reactive to others' flaws, mistakes, or pain. Compassion does not exclude reason. On the contrary, it demands clarity. When another's behavior confuses or hurts us, our first reaction may be anger or defensiveness. But if we are aware enough to pause and recognize that their behavior may stem from pain, lack of control, or unhealed wounds, we can choose to respond with compassion instead of confrontation. Compassion must also be extended inward. In Stoic practice, reflection is not for self-condemnation, but for observation and adjustment. Without self-compassion, this process can turn harsh, leading to guilt and self-rejection. A truly strong person is one who can face their own mistakes honestly, yet still offer themselves patience and forgiveness in the process of growth. Compassion does not eliminate boundaries. Understanding and empathy do not mean tolerating harm or disrespect. Compassion is paired with discernment. It allows one to act firmly when necessary, not from anger or revenge, but from clarity and protection of what is right, both for oneself and others. When faced with difficult, unstable, or hurtful people, responding with compassion is not weakness. It is the choice of one who understands that all behavior has roots, that even those who harm are wrestling with something within. This insight helps the Stoic practitioner avoid being pulled into cycles of negativity and prevents others from dictating their responses. Ultimately, compassion is a form of inner freedom. When a person is no longer driven by the need to retaliate, no longer shaken by others' imperfections, they become grounded, not because they are detached from emotion, but because they stand within emotion, understanding it, allowing it, and choosing to act deliberately. This is the posture of one who holds both reason and heart, where compassion becomes the foundation for a balanced, harmonious, and deep life. 11. Responsibility is freedom. In common thinking, freedom is often equated with being unbound, not being forced, not being accountable to anyone, not having to follow any rules. Yet in Stoic philosophy, freedom carries an entirely different meaning. True freedom does not come from escaping duty, but from willingly accepting responsibility for oneself, especially for one's emotions and actions. Responsibility here goes beyond roles like work, the family, or society. It includes owning how one feels and responds to life. In every situation, no matter how harsh the circumstances or unfair the behavior of others, Stoicism teaches that we retain the power to choose our response, and in that choice lies the beginning of freedom. When we blame others for our negative emotions, anger, disappointment, hurt, we hand over control of our inner life. We say we are sad because someone hurt us, or angry because someone misbehaved. But in truth, the event is just the trigger. How we interpret and respond is the real cause. Without this awareness, we become victims of circumstances and lose self-governance. Conversely, when a person chooses to take responsibility for their own reactions, they reclaim authority over their inner world. They no longer avoid emotions, but they also do not let emotions justify their behavior. They do not deny the world's influence, but they understand that response is a personal choice, always within one's power to refine. Responsibility is not a burden, but the foundation of maturity. An emotionally mature person does not blame others for their actions. They don't say, "I couldn't help it because he made me angry," but instead, "I chose anger because I had not yet mastered my reaction." The shift lies in moving from a victim mindset to a master's mindset, a profound change with enduring impact. Taking responsibility breaks the chain of reactive behavior. When disrespected, the instinct is to retaliate or lash out. But if, in that moment, one asks, "What am I feeling? How can I respond without losing myself?" they create space for choice. And in that space, inner freedom is restored. In Stoicism, greatness is not about never being insulted. It's about staying centered when insulted. Such individuals do not act from reflex, but from the conviction that they alone are responsible for what they say, do, and feel. Their equilibrium doesn't depend on others' moods, but on their own clarity. Responsibility also brings clarity. When there's no one left to blame and no one to carry consequences for us, we are left face to face with ourselves. We begin to see our mental habits, emotional patterns, and defense mechanisms. From that awareness, change begins. No longer driven by unconscious reaction, we begin to act from reason. Freedom in Stoicism is not an external condition. It is an internal steadiness. It does not rely on favorable events, but on personal agency and the courage to accept responsibility, not only for behavior, but for emotion, is the first step toward that freedom. 12. Establishing clear emotional boundaries. In relationships, both personal and professional, emotional boundaries act as the fences that protect our inner balance. Unlike physical boundaries, which are visible, emotional boundaries are invisible lines that define what we will and will not accept from others. In Stoic philosophy, maintaining mental stability requires clearly distinguishing our emotions from external influence. Emotional boundaries are not walls to isolate us, but gates with awareness. They are not meant to cut off connection, but to preserve the health of connection. Without clear boundaries, one becomes vulnerable to manipulation, guilt over saying no, or feeling trampled. Over time, this leads to emotional depletions and inner disorientation. A core Stoic principle is the distinction between what we can control and what we cannot. Emotional boundaries bring this idea into daily interactions. For example, when someone loses their temper, instead of reacting in kind, the Stoic recognizes that another's emotion lies outside their control. They do not have to carry it, nor let it disturb their own equilibrium. Setting emotional boundaries begins not with outward actions, but inward clarity. One must first know their core values, recognize what throws them off balance, and define acceptable limits in communication. Once this inner clarity is achieved, boundaries emerge naturally, not as force, but as presence. Saying no calmly or declining to engage in toxic conversation is not distance, it is awareness in action. Those with healthy boundaries do not over-explain because they understand protecting their energy is their responsibility, not others. A crucial part of setting boundaries is clear communication. Many avoid it out of fear of judgment, hurting others, or losing approval. But ambiguity breeds misunderstanding, conflict, and resentment. Clarity in speech need not be harsh, but it must be honest and firm. Statements like, "I need some quiet time," or "I'm not comfortable discussing this topic," are simple yet powerful. Emotional boundaries must also be applied inwardly. At times, we judge ourselves harshly or pressure ourselves relentlessly. Internal boundaries mean knowing when to pause, rest, or release toxic thought loops. This is key to sustaining long-term emotional resilience. With clear emotional boundaries, one no longer reacts impulsively. They gain the power to pause, to choose, and to stay present in any situation. This protects them from external chaos and builds a foundation for healthy, respectful relationships. In the Stoic spirit, setting emotional boundaries is a sign of wisdom and self-respect. It is not withdrawal. It is the means to protect one's values, maintain balance, and live deliberately amid the inevitable chaos of life. 13. Letting go of the need to control others. One of the deeper causes of stress, frustration, and conflict in relationships is the desire to control others, their thoughts, feelings, actions, and responses. Though sometimes rooted in good intentions, like wanting the best for loved ones or trying to keep things on track, the urge to control beyond healthy limits often brings the opposite result: conflict, pressure, and helplessness. In Stoic philosophy, the most important step toward inner peace is the clear distinction between what is within our control and what is not. What lies within our control includes our thoughts, emotions, actions, choices, and responses. In contrast, the thoughts, emotions, and actions of others, no matter how close, fall outside our direct influence. Attempting to interfere with those things not only violates another's personal space, but also drains us with unnecessary mental burden. The impulse to control others often appears in subtle forms. In close relationships, it may take the shape of expectations that the other person should understand, meet emotional needs, or behave in the right way. In the workplace, it may show up as the desire for colleagues to change attitudes, subordinates to follow exact instructions, or superiors to fully recognize our worth. When things don't go as expected, disappointment, anger, or hurt follows, often leading to negative and unregulated reactions. Letting go of control does not mean indifference or resignation. It is an acceptance of the reality that each person has their own path, their own lens, and their own pace of growth. Change, if it happens, comes from within, not by external pressure. When one stops trying to change others, they can redirect attention to the only thing they truly can control: themselves. This creates a profound psychological release. Letting go also does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. On the contrary, when others act with disrespect or inflict harm, setting boundaries, creating distance, or stepping away from the relationship is a way to protect oneself, but it is done with intent, not emotional reaction. It arises not from a desire to control the other, but from clarity about one's own limits and values. Another key benefit of releasing the need to control is the ability to listen and be present more fully in relationships. Without the pressure to fix others, we can listen with greater openness and understanding, free from the reflex to judge, react, or manipulate. This improves the quality of connection and builds a foundation of mutual respect. In Stoic practice, relinquishing control is a sign of emotional maturity. It reflects the recognition that everyone has the right to their own journey, and that inner peace does not come from having others behave as we wish. Instead, peace arises from living aligned with our values, responding with awareness, and accepting that life will always carry a degree of unpredictability. When we stop trying to fix others, we free ourselves from unnecessary burdens and give space for others to grow in their own way. That is the deepest form of respect, not in forcing change, but in trusting each person's capacity to evolve, including our own. 14. Learning to live with imperfection. Imperfection is an inseparable part of human nature. Although modern society constantly promotes images of flawless success, ideal appearances, and error-free living, the truth remains: no one lives without mistakes, weaknesses, or stumbles. In Stoic philosophy, accepting imperfection is not just a personal choice. It is a necessary principle for sustaining inner peace and long-term growth. One of Stoicism's foundational principles is distinguishing what can be controlled from what cannot. Human nature, with all its limitations, emotions, errors, and flaws, falls into the category of what cannot be fully controlled. No one can completely eliminate fear, anger, or sadness. What can be done is to recognize them, direct them, and not allow them to drive behavior unconsciously. Living with imperfection does not mean resignation or justifying harmful habits. It means facing the incomplete parts of ourselves without avoidance or denial. When someone accepts that they are still in the process of becoming, they can confront mistakes without self-condemnation and see weaknesses without negating their worth. This opens space for learning, adjustment, and steady development. Imperfection also appears in relationships. Everyone has expectations, and when others don't meet them, feelings of disappointment, anger, or hurt may arise. But if we understand that others are also wrestling with their own inner limits, ones they have not yet surpassed, we can be less harsh and more emotionally balanced. This becomes the foundation for relationships rooted in empathy and realism rather than idealization or control. One of the greatest benefits of embracing imperfection is the ability to let go of unrealistic expectations. Many negative emotions stem from the clash between what we expect and what is. Expecting to always be strong can lead to shame when we feel weak. Expecting a plan to unfold flawlessly can cause frustration when obstacles arise. But when we accept that mistakes are a natural part of living, each setback becomes a chance to practice patience, flexibility, and humility. In Stoicism, no one is expected to be a perfect model. Even Marcus Aurelius, a powerful emperor and wise philosopher, recorded moments when he lost control, fears he had not overcome, and mistakes he was still trying to correct. The practice of Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless or flawless, but about staying awake during the slow work of inner transformation. Each day is a chance to improve, to understand ourselves more deeply, and to act more consistently with our chosen values. Accepting imperfection is also essential for maintaining self-respect. When we allow ourselves to err, to learn, and to grow, our confidence becomes more stable. We no longer need others' approval to feel valuable, because we understand that true worth comes not from being perfect, but from the steady commitment to progress. Learning to live with imperfection is not a path toward complacency, but a path toward honest acceptance, where we are courageous enough to face ourselves, gentle enough to show ourselves mercy, and patient enough to keep practicing day after day, despite the flaws that remain. This is the path Stoicism points toward. Not perfection, but agency, resilience, and authenticity. What convinces me of the value of Stoicism doesn't lie in ancient texts, but in its practical power to meet ordinary situations. Each day, we face things beyond our control, from others' attitudes and work pressure to unexpected emotional waves. Without solid inner tools, we're quick to react, lose our temper, or spiral into blame and prolonged emotional wounds. I began with small steps, pausing a few seconds before replying to an irritating message, taking a deep breath when I noticed my body tensing up, jotting down a few lines each evening to reflect on how I reacted and why. I don't always get it right, but each moment I catch myself acting unconsciously is a moment that matters. It's not a failure. It's a lesson delivered straight from life. One thing I've learned through countless repetitions: self-mastery isn't gained overnight, but forged through hundreds of choices not to react, choosing to pause, to observe, then to act with awareness. We don't need to become philosophers to live by Stoic principles. We only need to begin with one emotion, one decision, one moment, and repeat it daily. If you found this video helpful, consider like, subscribe, and turning on notifications so you won't miss future content. It not only supports my effort to continue sharing these values, but also marks a turning point in your own journey toward mindful living. Always remember, peace doesn't come from a world without storms, but from the ability to hold the mast steady when the wind begins to rise. See you in the next video.